Awesome. Hi, everyone. Panos here from Pinoy. We're just gonna wait a few more minutes so that people can join. There's quite a few still joining. So Leonard and I will begin the presentation in roughly 2, 3 minutes. I appreciate it. Awesome. I think we can get the webinar started. Hi, everyone. This is Panos, founder and chief product officer here at Pinoy. And today I'm very happy to be having Leonard Pastrana with us in this webinar where we're going to be discussing certain fundamental concepts around breath analysis, and most importantly, how breath analysis and the information derived from it can help us better inform peptide treatment and also develop personalized nutrition, training, and lifestyle strategies for individuals, either to prevent chronic conditions or treat chronic conditions. Leonard is a longtime Pinoy affiliate, a longtime Pinoy user, has a lot of experience with using the Pinoy breath analysis device, as well as other modalities for biometric assessment. And he's also an expert in peptide therapy. He's joining us from New BioAge, a leading company in the peptide space. And he recently gave a presentation, a CME presentation, at the A4M conference in West Palm Beach. That was a few weeks ago. And today's webinar is going to summarize the content of this presentation and focus on certain very interesting case studies that Leonard has to share with us. So without further ado, I open it up to Leonard, who is going to tell us a little bit about his background and then go into the presentation on breath analysis and peptides. Um, Leonard, thank you again for joining.
Thank you. Fun to be here talking about my two favorite things, peptides, cellular medicine, and metabolic breath analysis. And I remember coming across Pinoy, it was years ago, and I was so excited about it because as we were studying, I'm a pharmacist, by the way, and as we were studying different medicines and understanding how to improve cellular efficiency and optimize patients, we realized that we were almost having the same conversation as Pinoy was putting out there, especially in their education around metabolic breath analysis. And one of the things that we were interested in is not just medicine. I'm a pharmacist that actually like to take patients off of medications, but we were looking at how do we measure those outcomes? Like, how do we know that what we're doing is actually working? And is there any type of biomarkers that we can use to pivot treatment plans. And we quickly realized that metabolic breath analysis was by far the best thing that we can look at in terms of metabolism. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about today on kind of how we use it. I'm going to go through these slides a little bit quicker than normal because I want to get more of the kind of the clinical aspect on how we use this data. And so I want to talk a little bit about aerobic metabolism and breath analysis, but really how do we use this in the clinical application of longevity medicine or weight loss or performance? Because it plays a huge role, and my hope is that in the future more physicians are going to be utilizing this with their patients. So, of course, we have to start with what is aerobic metabolism. It's obviously the cell's ability to utilize oxygen to um, to oxidize certain substrates like carbohydrates and fats to create energy or like let go of energy or release the energy. And so this is really the foundation of everything, the foundation of life, right? And at least in the medical community, we're looking at blood biomarkers and we're looking at almost the conclusion of what happens when we utilize oxygen through our cells. And so we're looking at these downstream cellular efficiencies. But this is why I like breath analysis so much, because there's nothing more pure than measuring the amount of oxygen coming into the system, how it goes through the lungs, the blood circulation, the heart, and how it's expelled as CO2. And we know that this inefficiency of oxygen to be utilized is crucial in things like diabetes. We know that the heart's inability to pump oxygen-rich blood is detrimental in heart disease, and there's the obvious connection between oxygen and the lungs.
And
And
it's
so,
very
yeah,
important to note here. Sorry, Leonard, if you want to go back to the previous slide, that
sure.
to this date, breath analysis has been around for about 100 years, and breath analysis to date is the only assessment known to mankind that can reliably assess how these three systems work individually, but also in unison. And that's how we started from breath analysis that dates back in the 1920s, as Leonard was about to show. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so this isn't necessarily anything new. It's pretty foundational. We were looking at, oxygen utilization for the caloric needs of the human body, and then pretty quickly, any expertise in cardiology, pulmonology, exercise science needed to look at this data, but unfortunately, it was very hard to look at. And this isn't something that I learned about in pharmacy school, and even though it was so crucial to even drug development, and we'll see that in the coming up soon here. But usually the machines were very expensive. The data was raw. You would need a team of statisticians to understand the data that was coming out. So the data was out there. Research labs were using it, but it really wasn't accessible until at least I came across Pinoe, that made this much different, made it more affordable, portable, much easier to analyze the results, automatic analysis. And now this is where this field of longevity and medicine, this direction that even physicians and patients are going into, is based around these metrics. And so what we're actually measuring is the concentration of oxygen, the concentration of CO2, and that volume of air. And these are the three fundamental signals. And we're looking at this through inhalations and exhalations. So we know that when we exhale, there's going to be a rise in CO2, a decrease in O2. And when we take these fundamental signals and we combine them with things like heart rate and power output, we can get these 23 biomarkers. Now, these 23 biomarkers, the most common one, of course, is VO2 max. And this is what everybody is talking about. But this is the biggest mistake that I think that maybe the medical community or even the longevity community in whole is making, is that they're just thinking about a VO2 max number and that's it. And unfortunately, they're missing out on all this amazing data that needs to be acquired to get to that VO2 max, where I think all the gold really lies. And some people are looking at measuring VO2 max with like a watch or some of these things that aren't accurate. And they're saying, well, we can still see the trend, even though it's not accurate, but I think you're missing out on a ton of information because you're not looking at things like fat oxidation and carbohydrate oxidation, O2 pulse. There's so much more data than just VO2 max that makes this type of analysis, on another, completely different from what we see out there. And then again, like Panos was saying, is it's the accumulation of these data points, of these biomarkers, where we can start to look at systems as a whole, not just the brain as a whole or the heart as a whole, but how they're interacting together. And this is really why I think it's so important in medicine, because we're trying to, yes, look at the root cause of why things are going on, but we need to see it in relationship to everything else. Most of the things in medicine aren't in a vacuum, right? Somebody can have skin issues, but it's something to deal with the gut, and we have to understand how all these systems are dealing with each other. And this is one of the only biomarkers where we can really assess how these systems are playing together. Now, some of the insights that we get from metabolic breath analysis are amazing. Of course, we have the VO2 max, and this is going to be great for biological age. There's a number of studies talking about mortality risk, and we know we can make a significant impact on longevity, lifespan, health span when it comes to VO2 max. But when we look at even closer, we can start to look at how these systems play together. So we can look at cardiorespiratory disease prevention. But where I think that we're going to see the most information, or we're going to see really take off, is in this more of this green box over here, where we can have all these measures of metabolism, especially with what's going on when it comes to metabolism in the United States, what's going on with the medications that are being prescribed, the ability to actually look at somebody's metabolism if their metabolism is slowed down, the ability to look at their metabolic flexibility or inflexibility. And my favorite thing is how you can actually address or assess mitochondrial dysfunction. And so this is going to play a key role in things like weight loss, metabolic syndrome, longevity, and performance. And this is closely related to every other disease state, right? So metabolism is at the core of the three leading causes of death: cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, cancers. So it's a metabolic dysregulation. And the ability to really take a look at these biomarkers makes all the difference. Now, when it comes to this in comparison to other biomarkers, what I can tell you is that we look at some things when it comes to the spectrum. How many things can you look at once? And also the specificity, right? And so, like we mentioned earlier, there's nothing more pure or specific than actually measuring oxygen utilization. And when it comes to the spectrum, I can tell you this, that I use all these. I use blood analysis, I use body composition. All these are important. But there's nothing that I can do and see how somebody's cellular efficiency is working, then coming in and doing an RMR right away. Within the first 10 minutes, I can assess what's happening in that patient. There's no other tool that I have that tells me more about that patient that quickly than breath analysis. And then, of course, when you combine those results with everything else that you need to wait on, is where you can get really great results on putting a treatment plan together. So detecting metabolic dysfunction. So one of the things that we do is looking at something like RER, respiratory exchange ratio. And so this is the ratio of the concentration of CO2 and oxygen. And this is basically telling us what substrate they're utilizing. If you have a value closer to 0.7, you're looking at 100% fat utilization, versus a value of 1, you're looking at glucose utilization. And we can see the difference between somebody in a healthy metabolic state who has a lower RER compared to somebody in an unhealthy metabolic state. Now, normally we want that fat substrate or energy production to be the majority. So we have something like fat to carb ratio of 60-40, 70-30. This is what we're looking at, even 80-20. But when we have somebody that's metabolically unflexible or in an unhealthy state, we'll see the inverse of this, and we'll see them mostly using carbohydrates. So it'll be 70-30 carbs to fat in the opposite direction. And right away, we know what type of risk that we're dealing with. And what's really interesting, we'll talk about it a little bit later, is that some of the drugs that we're studying for the next generation of medications and peptides that are coming out, they're looking at this specifically in their studies. They're looking at respiratory exchange ratio. So it's nice to see that Big Pharma is finally catching up to what we already knew a while ago when it came to exercise and the importance of performance. So that was through a resting test. But if you look at an active test, if we can actually get someone to actually move, the type of data that we can get, you can see that this dark green line is their heart rate that's slowly increasing. When someone's on the treadmill, every single minute, they're going a little bit faster. We can actually see this dark green line where we can see their fat oxidation. And as that exercise increases, we can see carbohydrates start to take over. And we start to get all types of great data points like their fat max, when carbohydrates took over. But the the key important part here is that as exercise intensity increases, our ability to oxidize fat efficiently decreases, and we rely more on glucose. So our metabolically inflexible patients rely on glucose earlier on in this process. And because we know that fat is oxidized in the mitochondria, therefore, by measuring fat oxidation, we can indirectly measure mitochondrial function. And there's very little ways to do that. And this is, for me, my favorite way of identifying that, because mitochondrial, you hear about mitochondrial function everywhere you go. We need to improve mitochondrial function. We need more mitochondria. We need more efficient mitochondria. Mitochondria is the basis of everything. Well, there aren't too many things out there that can measure it, and this is one way that we do it. And so we look at this when it comes to studies. They compared professional athletes versus moderate active versus patients that had metabolic syndrome. And so for the professional athletes up here, you can see as power output increases, they're able to oxidize fat for a much longer time before that crossover happens. And you look at a moderately active, healthy patient, they're oxidizing fat at the beginning, but that crossover you see happens a little bit sooner because their mitochondria is not as efficient. They're not a professional endurance athlete that's constantly training their mitochondria. Now, when you look at metabolic syndrome, that patient at a very small output, they've already crossed over before the test even happens. And if you're using metabolic breath analysis right now, if you're using PNOE right now, you'll see that sometimes you make a mistake on selecting the right program, because if somebody is metabolically unhealthy, you don't even get to see their fat oxidation, because just as soon as they start walking, they've already crossed over. And so as someone like that, they have to start very, very, very slowly. And so this is when we know we have, a patient with potential metabolic syndrome or metabolic inflexibility. Now, getting to how we use this clinically, where we started to see a lot of exercise intolerance and a lot of issues, of course, was during COVID. And COVID was thought to be this inflammatory respiratory condition, which it was. But as the studies came out, we were able to see that it was more of a mitochondrial dysfunction. And it makes sense, because if you look at mitochondrial myopathies, you can't boil it down to, I have a respiratory infection or I have an immune issue. Most patients with a long haul COVID or post-COVID acute syndrome, they have issues everywhere. Psychologically, there's the neuro issues, there's metabolism issues. It's all over the place. And this is very similar to mitochondrial myopathies. And we started to see that in some of these studies, we saw decreased fatty acid oxidation and altered lactate production during exercise in patients with post-acute syndrome. And so we saw that long haul patients, they showed evidence of impaired use of fatty acids to provide substrates for mitochondria. And so this makes sense, especially with their symptoms.
Yeah, which, Leonard, would be equivalent to seeing this crossover point moving to the left, as we saw in the previous three charts you indicated, where you had like athletes, crossing over a lot later in the exercise domain intensity spectrum, versus as people become unhealthier, whether that is because of lifestyle or whether that is because of, viral infection in the case of COVID that triggers like a widespread global inflammatory response. And ultimately that shifts the mitochondrial function to become, less effective, and then ultimately that crossover point moves to the left.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we've seen. And if you've been dealing with patients, or if you've been coaching anybody that had issues post-COVID for whatever reason, you'll notice that their exercise tolerance had changed. And these were typically healthy people, pre-COVID. So it wasn't necessarily a metabolic syndrome, but it was reflecting that, and it was mimicking that. And so this is an interesting case study for this exact situation that we're talking about. It was a 40-year-old male with this COVID long haul. He had 6 months of chronic lung infections, sinus infections, post-COVID complications, multiple courses of antibiotics. They were dealing with, and then we see this a lot in COVID, like kind of anxiety and depression issues when they're not an anxious or depressed person to begin with, right? And so they knew that they were off. They had kind of recovered, but they knew something was still missing, a lot of foggy brain. Now, this is why I think, using a device like PNOE for an initial assessment is so important, because luckily before COVID, we had done an active test in this patient, and they had a VO2 max of 45. We saw their zone 2 was 103 to 116, and we had their fat max. Now they came in trying to get their life back together, saying, okay, let's reassess where we're at so we can look at what limitations we have, and so we can get back to exercising and having the energy that we knew we had pre-COVID. And so when we did this active test, a little over a year later, you can tell that VO2 max took a significant hit. And this level is supposed to be, this 832 is supposed to be 82 to 103, right? So we saw that their zone two had completely shifted to the left, like Panos said, right? And so if you look at their fat max, it's 82 from 103. So we know what here? We know that glucose is taking over a lot quicker. So that efficiency of the mitochondria is where the issue is at. And so we're able to identify this is a mitochondrial issue. And now that we understand that, now we can take a much more targeted approach to what the treatment plan is going to be. And so this is another aspect that I love about, and this is not something that you see in other diagnostic tools or devices or things that measure biomarkers, is that the test actually becomes the treatment now, right? So the values that we get from these biomarkers are actually a big part of how we treat that patient. We know that we can train zone two, we can train fat oxidation. We know that we can train this by simply showing patients where their zone two is, doing 45 minutes of zone two training 4 days a week. We can improve the efficiency here. Now, the other thing that we want to do is start adding multiple modalities, right? And so this is where peptides came into play, where there was a peptide called MOTS-c, which is a mitochondrial peptide. Now, this mitochondrial peptide does a number of different things, but one of the things that it does is that it increases AMPK. It has an effect on GLUT4 transport, and GLUT4 is what brings glucose into the cell appropriately. This is the same thing that happens when we do resistance training. It's the same thing that happens when we exercise. And so utilizing a peptide that was working specifically on the mitochondria to dispose of that glucose was going to be really effective. Now, at this time, when we were looking at this, there was a study that had come out with NMN and its ability to improve ventilatory threshold 1, which is very similar to where you see zone 2. And so we were experimenting with combining this NMN, which is an NAD precursor, with low doses of leucine, because leucine has showed to have low doses of leucine were shown in some studies to activate NAD precursors, or need less NAD precursor to activate all these genes that have to do with fat oxidation and mitochondrial function. So this was part of the treatment plan. Of course, we did resistance training, because what else improves or translocates GLUT4 for glucose disposal? Resistance training. This is how you can dispose of glucose even better. This is why diabetics have such a great outcomes when they start to lift weights. And depending on the patient, because some patients with this post-COVID fatigue, they can't do HIIT training because they can't get to zone 5 because they are that fatigued. Luckily, in this patient, they were able to do that, so we added that. But here you can see, because of the data that we got from this breath analysis, we were able to take a really targeted approach, and understanding the mechanisms behind it, take multiple approaches from exercise to mitochondrial peptides to supplementation. And so you can see that in just 2 months of doing this, there was a dramatic change. Now, I don't expect to have changes this fast, but it did happen this fast in this patient when we put everything together. Their VO2 max came almost back to baseline, and their zone 2 had started to shift again to the right, and you see their fat max shifting again to the right. So we know what we're doing is working. And this was back in 2022. This patient's already got a VO2 max now in the very high 50s. So they were able not only to come back from this, but be stronger after this. So again, measuring VO2 max. VO2 max is fun because we know it's the strongest predictor of how long you're going to live. I like this because we're talking about a patient that might be sick, or post-COVID acute patients, but we have those clients or patients that are already kind of healthy, and we want to know, they're coming in because they want even more energy. And looking at VO2 max, or the studies behind VO2 max and mortality risk, we have so much data on this. But what's really cool about this is this study right here that shows us that there is no observed upper limit of benefit. Meaning this isn't just for patients that have metabolic syndrome. You have someone that's already healthy, you can make a significant impact on their mortality risk. And what was great about this study, especially when you're talking about people in the medical industry, is they were comparing the hazard ratios to things like smoking and diabetes and end-stage renal disease. And if you look at if you take somebody with a low VO2 max to just below average, the hazard ratio is similar or even higher than smoking and coronary artery disease and diabetes. So that's the impact you can make on somebody that's metabolically or has a low VO2 max. But what's even better about that is the amount of clients you can work with, because you take somebody that already has a high VO2 max, if you can take them to elite, this hazard ratio, you made a significant difference similar to someone with coronary artery disease. So even someone that's healthy, you can make a significant impact on their longevity when it comes to improving their VO2 max. Now, how do we use this with GLP-1s, right? So GLP-1s like Ozempic, semaglutide, tirzepatide, this is, it seems like everybody in the world is taking these medications. And so obviously they're great at helping people lose weight, at least a number on the scale. But one of the things that most people are worried about is, are we losing muscle mass in the process? And what's the deal with P patients? Do they have to be on this forever, or are they going to regain all the weight, right? And so this is one of the greatest tools we have for assessing which patient or identifying which patient is going to be at the highest risk of weight regain. Because like I said, I am a pharmacist, but I do like to get people to leverage their own cellular efficiency and eventually take them off medications so they don't have to be on them. And so we can actually look using RMRs and metabolic breath analysis to see who's at highest risk by assessing their metabolic slowdown. So we can look at their RMR and see if their metabolism is slowing down. We can look at body composition and see if their muscle is decreasing as well. So we can tell which patient is probably not a candidate to come off the medication as fast as you would think, even if they hit their goal weight. And then this is what dictates what we're going to do. Maybe we start to wean the GLP-1 back and start to decrease the dose and make sure that they can maintain that weight. But an even better thing to do, or the how we pivot treatments, is to improve their energy expenditure, right? To improve their metabolism. And we know that one of the best ways to do this is to increase their muscle mass. And so this is another thing that we get great data from the PNOE, is looking at protein intake and macronutrients and the way that we can prescribe exercise, what volume of resistance training, because this is some of the stuff the reports show us. And so the treatment plan pivots to, okay, you're getting close to your weight loss, but now let's focus on muscle. Let's focus on resistance training so that we can increase your metabolism. So once you get off this GLP-1, you won't have that weight regain, and you can actually eat more than you were before and maintain your same weight. And so this is not only how we assess patients and how it dictates our treatment plans, but this also gives us clues onto what co-activating compounds we want to utilize with GLP-1s, right? So if we're looking at a protocol for muscle mass, we're going to be considering hormone replacement like testosterone, or utilizing peptides like growth hormone releasing peptides, like Samorelin or CJC and Ipamorelin, to improve their natural production of growth hormone, right? Because this is going to be catabolic to fat and anabolic to muscle, which is what we're looking to achieve. Also, we know there's a lot of supplements that have a lot to do with muscle and protein synthesis, like alpha-ketoglutarate, urolithin A. But there's a number of different routes we can go, but it's the data is really what becomes so important here when it comes to the management of GLP-1s. I think this is really the future of doing GLP-1 treatment correctly. Now, talking about the future of GLP-1s, we're studying some of the next generations of peptides that are coming out. And this is one of the presentations I'll have in a couple of weeks at Peptide World Congress, is that we're not the only ones paying attention to this right now. If you look at big pharma, some of the big companies that are doing the drug development when it comes to GLP-1s, they're also measuring this as well. And so future drug development is not, these GLP-1s are not just being used in weight loss, they're used in a number of things like, well, we know with diabetes, but anything that has to do with metabolic optimization. We're actually already looking at this in osteoarthritis, right? Because what happens when we can decrease patients' weight and decrease their inflammation, and we can improve all these biomarkers? What we're really doing is improving inflammation. And so we see this in patients with osteoarthritis. We get these phone calls all the time. Patient gets down to goal weight. They want to stay on the GLP-1 because their osteoarthritis is gone, right? And so you can tell this is happening by where the pharmaceutical companies are spending their money. So these future GLP-1s, their primary endpoints are in osteoarthritis. And so everybody thinks of these as weight loss. but their phase 3 clinical trials are in osteoarthritis. And so what they're looking at is they're looking at substrate utilization to determine lipid oxidation, right? So what would be the ultimate, compound if there was one? Well, one that would mimic exercise, right? One that helps people lose weight, but doesn't decrease their energy expenditure and doesn't decrease their muscle mass. And this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to look at what types of drugs do that. What types of drugs cause the most lipid oxidation? And so you can see here, this is from a clinical trial with this third generation GLP-1 that's a triple agonist. First, there was semaglutide, then there was tirzepatide, which is a dual agonist. The one coming out in the next couple of years will be a triple agonist that adds glucagon. And you'll see that they're looking at respiratory exchange ratio. And what they showed is that they can keep the calories the same, but utilizing this peptide, the respiratory exchange ratio went down, meaning what? It's closer down to 0.7. So they're having more fat oxidation, right? So they're using fat more as a substrate. And this is what this green line is, the same amount of calorie intake, but with this medication, that RER value went down. And so they're also looking at energy expenditure, which is one of the main things that we're measuring as soon as someone comes in with a PNOE is looking at their energy expenditure. And so they found that when they have patients that decrease their calorie intake, you see this green line, look at what happens to their energy expenditure. It goes down when they restrict their calories too much. And what they found is that this new drug is going to be called retatrutide. It was able to maintain energy expenditure even with the caloric restriction. So same calories, but the energy expenditure was different. And this green line right here is what we're seeing in all the patients today. So this is where you see things like Ozempic face, and you see people that are losing muscle mass, and the medical community is worried we don't want patients losing too much muscle mass. Well, when you caloric restrict and you don't eat the appropriate amount of protein, this is what's going to happen. It's not the actual GLP-1. GLP-1 has a positive effect on muscle mass. It's the caloric restriction, and then there's a decrease in protein intake and also the big aspect when it comes to hydration that enhances protein degradation that's causing that loss in muscle. It's not actually the GLP-1. It's the caloric restriction and not having the right education around macronutrient intake, which is another reason why we love PNOE so much, because when we do these tests, we get a detailed summary of what their protein intake should be. And if you have hydration and protein intake on point, you're not gonna see this loss of muscle mass or a large loss of muscle mass. And just an interesting note, the way that this was done was through the glucagon receptor engagement. The glucagon is what they added to this medication, which is kind of mimics exercise and increases energy expenditure. Now, there's a lot of potential peptides that can influence these breath analysis biomarkers. I just went through a couple today, but we have the growth hormone secretagogues like sermorelin and CJC and ipamorelin. These stimulate the natural production of growth hormone that has a lot to do with fatty acid oxidation, muscle recovery, how fast our customers are recovering from exercise. We have mitochondrial peptides that have an effect on AMPK and glucose disposal. There's MOTC, and SS31 is a peptide that's still in development, phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials that actually improves the structure of mitochondria. We have some older, repurposed medications like amlexinox that increase energy expenditure. Another compound that's getting a lot of momentum right now is methylene blue, especially with red light therapy, because methylene blue has this ability to push electrons through the electron transport chain, right? Improving ATP and improving energy production. There's a supplement that we formulated called iCell water that has specific amino acids and creatine that act as osmolytes to improve intracellular water or cell volume to protect from protein degradation. And this is something that we use with any single patient. We put them on iCell water because the GLP-1s decrease thirst intake. And that decrease of thirst intake, less water, this is where you start to see protein degradation. And so having them drink at least 2 liters of water with these amino acids and creatine completely mitigates that and improves their performance. You also have supplements like alpha-ketoglutarate that are TCA intermediates, right? So the Krebs cycle, the way that we produce ATP, And then there's other things like low dose leucine, like leucinergy and citronol that act as exercise mimetics. And of course, there's the NAD precursors. I will mention this one, 1-methylnicotinamide. You might start to hear a lot more about this in the next year or two, but this is going to be kind of the next NAD. It's not an actual NAD precursor. It's the ability to improve your body's ability to make its own NAD. It's really interesting. So I'm looking forward to testing that compound. But again, we get all these great insights. Something that we do in the office is everybody does one, and we all compare our biological age, and we're all trying to get the best negative number, right? So this is something fun to do at work, or this is what the patients really like. This is they get to see this biological number, and it's this summary of everything else that's going on. That's fun. Again, calories in, calories out. There's no better way to test this. You can't use a formula. You want to know exactly what your patient's metabolism is, and the only way to do that is through breath analysis. I love the fact that we can look at fat and carbohydrate ratios because it opens up this amazing conversation with the patient to talk about cellular efficiency and how their cells are operating. It's a great conversation starter. Again, we know protein intake is so important. Understanding the correct macronutrients is going to be crucial in those outcomes. And it's better to have exact data and be precise about it than to be kind of guessing, which is what most people are doing without this type of information. Again, in the community of the medical community, at least, physicians aren't usually telling people how to exercise. They're just saying, hey, just move your body any which way you can so that you can at least do it. And I think that's an old way of doing things where we actually have to prescribe exercise now because patients want to know, well, how much interval training should I do? How much resistance training should I do? And having this data that provides what specifically is going to give them the best outcome gives them the best chance. And again, this isn't for a specific patient. I think the mistake that some people think is that this metabolic breath analysis is for, professional athletes or people that are high performers. Like we showed with some of the studies, it's anybody from someone completely metabolically inflexible to immune dysregulation all the way up to your high end athlete, and you can really use this data for a number of patients. But yeah, that's it. I was just kind of flying through all those patient case studies, but that's the end of the presentation part of it.
Thank you, Leonard. That was amazing. I think everybody got a good overview of what breath analysis does at its core, like the things that we measure. But then also, more importantly, what are the practical applications of all of these great insights that breath analysis can offer? And so I know we already have some questions lined up. So Leonard, if you want to, take a stab and start answering some of them, and we can do that in a conversational manner.
Sure. Can you read the questions? I don't think I can see them.
Oh, I see. Okay. By the way, a few
Oh, actually,
logistical
I
things.
think I
Just
see them here.
okay. Okay. Yeah. Just so you know, guys,
Oh, yep.
this webinar is being recorded. It's going to be provided. It's going to be available online, and then yes, the slides will also be provided, so we can focus on more scientific questions for the remainder of the webinar. So yeah, Leonard, if you want to start.
Sure. So one of the first questions was, what does metformin do to RER on testing? So we actually didn't test metformin. Metformin, of course, is like the longevity drug that's talked about the most. We actually stayed away from metformin just because there was a small decrease in what is called the people felt more tired when they were exercising. There's a more clinical way of saying it, but they showed that there was not that they exercise less, but the perceived energy on when you're taking metformin is harder. And so it's already hard for our patients to exercise at the point we want them to exercise. Perceived exertion, that was a term that showed that perceived exertion was increased. And so we kind of stayed away from that, especially like in our younger patients. I think metformin has a ton of great benefits. I don't know exactly what it does to RER, but I think it's a good option specifically in certain clinical applications. If someone has like insulin resistance, if they're a little bit older and they're not necessarily working out as hard and they're just doing some like maintenance type exercise, it's definitely has a good application. With the advent of GLP-1s, they do so many more things when it comes to calorie restriction, when it comes to inflammation. It has all these other great cellular effects that we've kind of moved towards GLP-1s, but that's a good question on metformin.
And
The other one
also a
is, do
segue.
you go ahead?
uh, Yeah, so something that I wanted to say, piggybacking off of that, as a company, something that we do on the side is we help companies or individuals developing supplements or other treatments to validate the extent to which these, supplements or treatments are affecting our metabolism in some capacity. And since there hasn't been a lot of work around metformin, that may be, something that we look at down the road. Currently, we are doing a validation on a supplement that is, supposedly will impact fat oxidation through AMPK activation. So perhaps metformin is going to have some sort of similar effect.
Yeah, for sure. That's exciting that you guys are going to be doing that.
Yeah.
Looking forward
Uh,
to seeing the results of that.
yeah, yeah. We are pretty excited about it as well.
Cool. So the next question is, do you suggest using metabolic organic acid urine tests to help determine metabolic faults if they are improving? That's a great question. I actually like to think about that a little bit more. I'm not using any metabolic organic acid urine test right now. What I found with metabolomics and a lot of the other tests is that things change so quickly and so acutely that I find it fascinating, but I haven't been able to clinically use that data the way I can use the metabolic breath analysis data. But it's a really interesting question, one I should probably think a little bit more about. But so many things, and actually, in this study that I was showing you with this triple agonist, they were looking at that, and they were showing that in the the placebo group, they looked at metabolomics, and they were able to stimulate 55 pathways from metabolic pathways in comparison to the placebo group with this one triple agonist. And this is because of its effect on glucagon and its effect on these exercise mimetic type pathways and this disposable of glucose that has everything to do with metabolism. So really interesting um, there, but great question. Slides,
Yeah.
yes. How is
How Pinoy
Pinoy?
is diff
How is
Yeah, how Pinoy is
uh,
different. Just a very short one, since that's an easy one for me. Yeah, so
sure.
HRV analysis is something that can simply predict VO2 max. The gold standard for measuring VO2 max is actually analyzing oxygen consumption by looking at oxygen concentration and flow volume. So yeah, Pinoy provides the gold standard for measuring VO2 max and has been independently validated. If you're using HRV to measure VO2 max, you are getting an estimate. You're not actually measuring it.
Cool.
And yeah, uh, we can move on to the
Yep.
next one.
Sure. Can I use this in my weight loss clinic for arrest testing? I do not have a treadmill. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great place to start doing arresting metabolic tests. You get to test their energy expenditure and their RMR. It's a great baseline to have as someone's losing weight. In your practice, hopefully you have a body composition scanner. If I would suggest getting one in there too, the combination of this breath analysis and a body composition scanner um, will tell you a lot that you need to know on how you pivot your treatment and what type of peptides and other things that you can add. But getting their baseline metabolism and energy expenditure, I think, is crucial at the beginning of any weight loss program. The graded exercise test to get the metabolic profile should not be a ramp test, right? Steady state mandatory to correct readings of RER. Can you please elaborate on this? Um,
Allow me to take this one because it's a little bit of a, debate. Not necessarily debate. There's like two types of exercise testing that you can do. And this is not based on PNOE. This is based on the scientific literature around breath analysis in general. There is the graded test where you keep someone for a certain period of time, around 3 minutes in every exercise stage. And then you have the Wasserman ramp where you're basically increasing the intensity every minute. And the amount by which you're increasing depends on the person's fitness level. Both are very acceptable by the scientific community. There's differences in how you analyze RER and other cardiometabolic variables. in one versus the other. But we typically recommend the latter, which is the Wassermann ramp test, where you increase intensity every minute, because it produces a shorter test that is more convenient for the subject and still provides us with the information we need to provide the report and the insights that people like Leonard use in their practice. But you can certainly do both protocols. In fact, we do have customers that utilize the first protocol, the graded one. But to my point earlier, both are acceptable.
Cool. Next question is SS31 available and how many we gain access to it? That one's a tough one to get. It's still in phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials. So it depends on, I would ask your pharmacy, but it's a much tougher peptide to obtain. It's just really interesting reading through the studies on what it does. I'm pretty excited about that one. Is breast analysis equipment available in a telemedicine type of way? That's an interesting question. I think about that all the time of how we can create a hybrid model of someone going into a location to get this type of testing and those results being delivered to a telemedicine platform so they can get that, so that the telemedicine company can have that data. I do see some other things being utilized, other ways of measuring VO2 max. But remember, when you see these other things, don't forget that you're not getting all the other crucial data if you're not doing, you're using a clinically validated device like Pinoe to get all this other data. But yeah, that's the question everybody's trying to answer is how do we deliver this through telemedicine? And I think a hybrid model where they go somewhere and actually get tested is going to be the best way.
Just
Can you help
to,
me with,
be
go ahead.
fair with everyone, I
Okay.
think, I can just copy, this question, and we'll post answers about it just so that we can go through a few more questions that others have.
Okay. Can you determine much about metabolic and mitochondrial health with just a resting breath analysis, or is exercise analysis required? So I'll say what I think, and then I'm actually interested in Panos what you have to say. When it comes to resting, I do get an idea of their mitochondrial health just because I'm looking at substrate utilization, and I'm looking at energy expenditure. So I can see someone's cellular efficiency pretty quickly, but it's not until they're really moving where I really understand their mitochondrial health, and seeing where that crossover happens. What do you think, Panos?
Yeah, so what we use in Pnoe within our algorithms, which is always based on what's available in the literature, both the resting and the exercise test can individually provide information about one's mitochondrial fitness. In the case of the resting test, looking at the base level RER during fastest state uh, does indicate, mitochondrial fitness and risk for developing metabolic dysfunctions. And then, the crossover point that Leonard was discussing earlier is also another way of looking into mitochondrial fitness. So I would say that these two indications can work synergistically. And I don't think we're at a point where we can say that one is better than the other. So yeah, if you have the ability to do both tests, 100%, please do so. Have the person undergo both tests. But the resting test alone has been shown in the literature to provide you with this type of information.
Yeah, for sure. If you see somebody's inverse substrate utilization, you know for sure we have a mitochondrial issue. So next question, what body composition analyzer do you prefer? Why? I think there's a nuance to this question. I have an in-body and I have a DEXA scan. I just got a DEXA scan this week, pretty excited about it. But the in-body I think is amazing. And this is what most practices have. And it really becomes a cost issue, right? So an in-body is very easy to use. The data is very good. You can definitely see trends. You can see visceral fat, muscle mass, fat tissue. It gives us all the data that we need. Now, if you're willing to spend the money on a DEXA scan, this is significantly more money, but there we get, bone mineral density as well. and there's more accuracy when it comes to somebody that is very thin or someone that is very heavy. Now, remember, I use an embody. That's the majority of how we do it. But with a DEXA scan, we can start looking at all the things when it comes to longevity. Because bone mineral density becomes a really big factor in longevity and lifespan mortality risk, and so that's something that we want to keep an eye on. So DEXA scans is the gold standard, but I think an embody is a great option. And all of our locations have one. I have a Staiku. How often do you suggest repeating the Pinoe if on an active weight loss program? Um, well, that's a can be different for everybody. If you have somebody that has lost, just maybe too much weight too fast, I would do an RMR, because an RMR is pretty quickly. You can do it right away. But at least 3 months is usually what we're looking at. I hope not to wait any longer than 6 months, but 3 months is usually when I have them come back. What should we be recommending regarding Ozempic and similar new weight loss drugs? As I'm reluctant to advise drug interventions generally, especially new drugs which have not had long testing periods amongst the public. So this is a great question. When it comes to recommending medications, it's always a matter of evaluating risk versus reward. And so with any intervention, I mean, even exercise, even a supplement, there is going to always be a risk. Ozempic, you're correct, Ozempic itself has not been tested very long term. Now, the class of medications of GLP-1s have been around for a long time. If you look at some of the first generations like liraglutide and things like that, they have minimal contraindications. Definitely somebody with like medullary thyroid cancer is somebody that you don't want to use this in. If they have a history of pancreatitis, it's not a contraindication, but there is a very small percentage. I mean, it's very, very minimal with somebody developing pancreatitis, something like that. But I have never had anybody with it. And so, yeah, it's individual for each person. You are able to explain what the benefits are, what the potential risks are, and everybody's tolerance for that, it's a little bit different. But we've seen you have to think about the benefit of getting someone from metabolically unstable to what quality of life and how many years do you add to their life when you can improve their body composition, their weight, their metabolism. So it's different for everybody, but it's definitely something to be concerned with, and a conversation that you should have with each patient. Mitochondrial function can also be approached using O2 kinetics. Have you ever tested the effects of these peptides on VO2 kinetics using Pinoe? No, we haven't taken it that far, but I'm really glad that Panos, you're developing a lot of new tests, and I'm looking forward to learning more on what metrics you guys are analyzing and what we can do as well.
By the way, if you can send me a little bit of information, Goncalo, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, on what exactly others have looked into when it comes to utilizing O2 kinetics as a marker for mitochondrial function. I would be very happy, and perhaps we should start to look into these factors, even retrospectively in studies we've done to date. Are we going to have a repeat of that webinar? No, it is going to be recorded and available online. And references on our independent validation can be found on our website, or if you can't find them, please email us and we will email them back to you. If you're interested in getting some of these peptides in Tennessee, that is, I'm not sure we're able to answer that question. Yeah, I don't personally know. I don't know if Leonard, you can
Yeah.
weigh in on this.
Yeah, there's been a lot of different changes with what peptides can be utilized and not utilized. Some of the ones, GLP-1s are not an issue. When it comes to growth hormone secretagogues, ones like Sermorelin are available. Every state is different because it's a state by state thing. But Yeah, it's tough. I would just talk to your local pharmacist, see what's available. It's in a transitional period right now as to what's available and what's not available. So it is a tough question, but unfortunately a hard one to answer. But we do have availability. You know, GLP-1s are available, some Morlin's available. There's still a lot of great stuff that can be utilized. I think with GLP-1s and growth hormone secretagogues alone, you can do a lot, especially in conjunction with some of these supplements like ISO water, AKG, Loose Energy. When you combine peptides and supplements and prescribe the exercise appropriately, that's when the outcomes are really great. How much do results vary with recent food intake, sleep, time of day, other variables to consider? Yeah, a lot. I think, Panos, you can answer this question better, but recent food intake will have an effect on it. Sleep, time of day will have a definitely effect on it. Actually, I just did one on myself the other day, and I can feel like I was getting sick that morning, but wasn't sure. And my heart rate, my breaths per minute were completely different than what they normally are. And so even somebody coming down with a cold can make a big difference.
100%, and that's why the number one thing that we advise our affiliates to do when it comes to testing and making sure that your accounting and your taking into account all these diurnal changes or other types of biological mechanisms that may be affecting the test is that you always test under the same conditions. That means that say that you measured someone at 6 p.m. after having ingested food, say 5 hours ago. Make sure that when you retest them, this exact same schedule is followed so that you can control for any potential factors like time of day, food ingestion, etc. Ideally you want to test people first thing in the morning, fasted, but we fully understand that in many cases this is not possible because people have a life and a schedule, and it's not always easy to change that just for one test. But that's okay. Make sure that when you retest, you pretty much have the same conditions as your original test.
I think that
Just
was
a
all of them.
yeah, just a follow up for Goncalo. You can email them directly to info@pinoe.com, and I will make sure that I get back to you. And that was pretty much it. I think, Leonard, we have to let you go. We are very grateful for spending the time and sharing all of these wonderful insights with us. Uh, Quite remarkable the work that you've done and how you've helped patients get to better health. Thank you everyone for joining. And as I said, this webinar is going to be available online. So if you know others that may be interested in the content and the information we discussed, obviously, please feel free to share it. And we look forward to having you in our next webinar. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a
Bye,
lot of
everyone.
fun. Thanks a lot. Bye.